That's the $1 million question, and that's the only one that I've written about. I have a lot of these stories that we've been speaking about. Eventually, they're going to be part of a book. I believe that one of the things you guys are doing, which I compliment you on, which is that you're recording history. And history is important to record, because if we don't know our history, people will make their own history. And people who make their own history sometimes don't make it accurate. And if it's not from our community, they'll make their own history that's not even our history. They'll make it the way they see it. So I think it's important that as Puerto Ricans, we document our own history, what you guys are doing with video. And one of the few documentations that I was able to do was the fact of, the book that I wrote. And I only wrote that book because, again, I got to thank Serrano because I was involved directly in the fact of Fidel Castro coming to the Bronx. And only the few people who worked with me at that time in 1995 knew the details of this. Even though it was world news, nobody explored the reasons how and why that happened. The CNN and all the news just covered the fact of Fidel Castro coming to the South Bronx, which was news. South Bronx was like, wow, one of the most dangerous areas of New York, and a world leader who's one of the most controversial leaders in the Western Hemisphere of the 20th century is coming to the Bronx. That was news, but nobody covered as to how and why. And I didn't care. I don't do things to get publicity. I do things because sometimes I think at first I was stupid, because I just say things and say, yo, you can't do this shit. And I'm going to jump into it. And then after I jump into it, I realize, coño, ¿qué carajo me metí? What the hell did I get myself into? But I guess it's a reaction. It's a reaction to an injustice. It's a reaction to what I saw that guy get shot 3 times in the back. That just affected my brain of abuses. I don't like abuses. And I always got to do something when I hear there's an abuse. And when I heard about the fact that the United Nations was celebrating its 50th anniversary as an organization, and therefore they were having a gala in where? The United Nations, the capital of the world, New York City. And over 180 leaders, not ambassadors, but leaders, were invited to come to the United Nations, New York City, to celebrate its 50th anniversary. And of course, one of the leaders, one of the presidents, is Fidel Castro. And I found out about it through an individual, David Galarza, who at that time was a friend. And he basically reached out to me. I was in Boston. I had left politics. My job was basically, I was trying to build a company called Latino Sports, which I gave up for a while. And now, thank God, I'm back into it. And that's going to be my retirement. But bottom line is, I was in Boston. I came down. David had told me something about, did you know how they're treating your friend? And I didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. And he said, about Fidel Castro. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, don't you read the papers? And I said, no, I don't. I get the papers. I read the back pages, sports, forward. I don't read the front pages anymore. But I listened to what he said, and I began to find out what was happening. And what happened was that apparently Fidel Castro was one of the persons that was being invited to come. And for some reason, not here in New York City, but of course the Cuban community in Miami that does everything possible to embarrass and to portray the ridiculous information about Fidel and the revolution in Cuba, etc. They all get paid by the State Department and CIA to promote negative stuff about Cuba, which is another story for another day, because when I was in RTP was a member of the United States Youth Council. The United States had the Youth Council. I was their representative. So every 3 months, I would go to Washington, D.C. and meet with young blanquitos from all over the United States who were part of the Youth Council. So I was into the situation with Cubans from Florida who were young that would come to New York, and we never got along. I got along with the African Americans and with the Chicanos from the West Coast, but I didn't click with the Cubans from Miami. And because of the studies that I had done about the Cuban Refugee Fund and all these other lucrative funds that they gave to Cubans that they didn't give to Puerto Ricans or to Haitians or to any other ethnic group, I knew the deal. So when I did my research and found out that Fidel was being disinvited by Giuliani to any event that the city had put together. So the city had welcome to New York to all the world leaders. Fidel wasn't invited. They had a concert in Carnegie Hall where he wasn't invited. Him and Yasser Arafat. Now, you don't have to be a freaking brain surgeon or go to MIT to understand why Yasser Arafat. He's Palestinian. He was the head of the PLO. And we all know from the early days of our landlords being Jewish to the ones who control the Bronx today being Jewish, to that New York City is a Jewish capital of the world, financial capital of the world. Call that whatever you want to call it. That's not anti-Semitism. That's not whatever. That's a fact. So the fact is that the mayor didn't have to do nothing. You know, if you want to get the support of the Jewish community, bro, you can't let this dude get away with, coming to New York and feeling like he's okay. So Yasser Arafat and Fidel Castro. But why Fidel Castro? There's not a lot of Cubans here. So what I did, again, because I treat people a certain way, I had worked in City Hall for many years. And I've treated police officers, guards, secretaries, custodians in a very decent way. So I started looking into what happened with Mayor Giuliani. And what I heard from inside was that these Cubans came to visit and met with Giuliani. Who were the Cubans? A guy by the name of Jorge Macanosa. Again, if you don't know history and you don't study, you don't know who this guy is. Jorge Macanosa. If you do the research, you know he was the head of the Cuban American National Foundation, which is a group that gets money from the CIA and from the State Department to promote a group called the council that they have for the business Cubans, but also they fund Radio Marti. Radio Marti is a program that they have full studios, bro, full studios to transmit propaganda towards Cuba. That's all funded by the State Department, right? His organization gets a lot of money to be able to do this. And everything that they've done is also anti-Cuba. So I'm thinking, why would a guy like that come and meet with Giuliani? Him and two other individuals. So what I found out was that allegedly, that's why the book says allegedly, he received $50,000 under the table to do something to embarrass Fidel. Why? Because when Fidel Castro had come to New York for the first time in 1961, I believe, after the revolution, Fidel was a fucking celebrity. He became like the celebrity. He was like, wow, it was like the Michael Jordan coming into a place, or like the, Beyonce coming to a place. I mean, everybody in Harlem wanted to take pictures with him. Malcolm X, Langston Hughes, they all went to the Teresa Hotel, which was a hotel prior to the office building that I moved to. They all went to visit with him. He would walk the streets, right? And you see pictures of Fidel with the people. They didn't want that shit. They wanted to make sure that whatever happened in 61 was not going to happen in 1995. That Fidel was a dictator. He was a murderer. Cuba is a communist country, blah, 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 blah. And that's why the mayor of the city of New York disinvited him. And the reason was humanitarian reasons. Okay, what does it have to do with me? I don't belong to no political organization. I don't belong to no radical organizations. In fact, I don't belong to no organizations. I'm trying to build a business. But I don't like abuses. So when I heard about that, I said, that's bullshit for humanitarian reasons. What about the African leaders in Africa who are cutting homosexuals' heads off? How about Arab sheiks and Arab leaders that were arresting women because they want to learn how to drive a car? Or how about the ones that they take a woman and they bury her and they leave her head sticking out from the sand, and then they have her sons and her family, males, throw rocks at her head to kill her because she wants to get a divorce, she wants to take off the veil, or she no longer wants to be in a relationship? That's not abuse? What about, in Cambodia, over 1 million that were killed? That's not an abuse? None of those people were disinvited. I said, well, wait a minute. The only Latino, I'm looking at it from that perspective, not politics, but Latino, is for humanitarian reasons. But these other people that are actually doing these other atrocities are not being disinvited. So I said, man, we got to do something. So I started, negotiating, talking, spoke to David about it. And he said, yo, somebody should say something. I said, bro, why me? He said, bro, because you know a lot of people. That's what he told me. You know a lot of people. I said, how the fuck I know? What am I going to do? Then I realized I was a member of the Puerto Rican, National Puerto Rican Business Council. It was an organization that was started by a guy named Carlos Nazario, who was a businessman here, who owned a warehouse here, beer and soda distribution. Other Puerto Ricans, who were very, wealthy, who were doing, things in the South Bronx, owning businesses, owning real estate. Jimmy from Jimmy's Bronx Café, a whole bunch of others. And I was part of that organization, Puerto Rican organization that was trying to build business, because we were the only ones that didn't have a business organization. The Cubans had business organizations, Dominicans had business organizations, Black had business organizations, and Puerto Ricans didn't. So Carlos wanted to start one. I said, that's a good idea. We started it. So I go to Carlos and I said, yo, Carlos, I got an idea, man. We want to be able to get ourselves known. How about if we say something against, Giuliani disinvited Fidel Castro? He said, bro, you crazy? He said, I was a fucking communist. We're a capitalist group. How the fuck are we going to do that shit, bro? And I said, bro, because I know the Cubans, and if we say something about Fidel and this is bullshit, bro, one day if the blockade gets knocked down and we're the only organization that stood up for that, shit, the Cubans are going to say, yo, we'll deal with all the U.S. corporations who want to deal with us, but this organization has to be part of it, or this organization has to coordinate this. He said, Julio, we can't do this shit, man, because I'm the only radical in the group. They were all Republican, they were all pro-statehood, and they were all wealthy. I'm not wealthy, I'm not Republican, and I'm not for pro-statehood, but I was a member because whenever they wanted to do stuff in the community, I was the only one that had the contacts. So if they wanted to get people to go give out flyers in front of a hotel because of Budweiser or against Coors or something, some union shit that we're doing, I would be the one to get the guys. So you give me a budget, right? And I'll get you 5, 6, 7 dudes. They ain't afraid to go into, freaking Marriott hotel, go inside and just put out flyers in all the top of the tables or go outside and do whatever. You give them $50 a piece for 1 hour or less, shit. I get you all the guys you want. So I was the one that used to do that. So that I was a member in good standing and whatever. So I go to Carlos and say, Carlos, we should do this. Carlos said, no, you can't do that. But then, like my father said, bro, el que no lee no tiene derecho a hablar. He who does not read does not have a right to speak. And as you can see in this house, bro, so there's nothing but things to read everywhere. And I remember the front page of the New York Times had a picture of Lee Iacocca. I don't know if you remember who Lee Iacocca was. Lee Iacocca was the head of Ford, who took Ford and built it to a top organization, a top business when it was like having problems, right? And then he left Ford to go to a company that was definitely about to go bankrupt, Chrysler Corporation. And the big news was that Lee Iacocca leaving Ford, going to Chrysler, and he's building Chrysler up again. He changed the cars, he got a convertible car to go up, he changed some shit, it's beginning to develop. And there's a picture of Lee Iacocca in Havana, on el malecón, and he's pointing to Miami, and the picture says underneath, he says, I can't believe I have thousands of cars 60 miles away, and they need so many cars here, and I'm in front of a Fiat dealership that's about to open. That was the picture and the caption of one of the most prestigious papers, if not the most prestigious paper in the United States, the New York Times, front page. I cut that shit out. I went to Carlos. I said, Carlos, is Lee Iacocca a communist? He said, of course not. I said, well, then check this out. And he read it. He said, yeah, I saw this too, but what does that have to do with us? I said, bro, if Lee Iacocca, who's a freaking capitalist, who's the head of freaking Chrysler, is in Havana, why do you think he's in Havana? Because it's all about business. And if we have a business organization, which is other conversations for us to think about, thinking outside the box for other things that we have talked about, well, it's the same thing back then. Think outside the box. Okay, so what? Cuba, you can call it whatever it is, but the fact is, it's not about communism. It's not about red, blue, or white. It's about green. It's about business. And that's why Lee Iacocca is there. So if we support Fidel and the Cubans by putting out a statement, that's all we got to do. Just put out a statement saying, hey, what Giuliani did was wrong. That was discriminatory. Because if he disinvited Fidel for humanitarian reasons, why didn't he disinvite these people, which was for atrocious reasons? So therefore, we conclude that what Giuliani did was wrong. That's it. We just do a press release. But it has to be with the name of the organization. Because then we take that press release, we hide it 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 2 years from now. The blockade comes down, bro. We go to Cuba and we say, look, we did this. I know the Cubans are like Puerto Ricans, bro. They're loyal. They'll say, estos fueron la gente que nos protegieron. No. Todo lo que tiene que ver con negocio tiene que ir con ellos. So Carlos says, you sure about that? I said, bro, the Cubans are just like us, bro. They're very loyal. So he says, I can get down with that, but I can't make the decision. The board has to make the decision. So I said, okay, let's talk to the board. So he got the board together, and he had me go on and explain to them. He said, Julio wants to come up with this idea, and they said the same thing. They said, bro, you freaking crazy? He said, we're fucking capitalists. Why would we be supporting a communist? So then he explained to them, and he showed them the thing about, talking about Lehigh Coke and stuff like that. And Rodriguez was the owner of the McDonald's on 161st across the street from Yankee Stadium, right? Now he owns about 20 of them. That time, that was his first one. And he says to me, Julio, will the Cubans allow me to put a McDonald's in Havana? And I said, absolutely not. But I tell you what, if the McDonald's Corporation worldwide at one point wants to put a McDonald's in Cuba, and the Cubans are willing to talk to them, and the Cubans find out that a Puerto Rican owns a McDonald's, and he criticized Giuliani for what they did to their leader, I bet you the Cubans would say, we'll talk to you, but that Puerto Rican has to be part of those conversations. So he said, yo, I'm down with Julio. I support this. So all of them said yes. And they gave me $500 to organize, an event, a press release, whatever. So I put it upon myself. We wrote this press release that basically said, the National Puerto Rican Business Council, blah, blah, blah. But then we needed another person to give it more oomph. David suggested that. David suggested, yo, you should try to get Congressman. I said, what the fuck am I Congressman? He said, bro, you know him, you work for him. Try to get him. It would add more, oomph to the press release. So I called Joe. And I said, Joe, we're going to do this. And he said the same thing. He said, you fucking crazy, bro? This is fucking communist. I'm going to have fucking people protesting in front of my office all the time for that shit. I said, bro, they ain't no fucking Cubans in the Bronx, and this is the right thing to do, And I said, bro, Jimmy's down with it. Carlos is down with it. Tommy Cuevas was down with it. Tommy was a multimillionaire in South Bronx. I said, bro, they're all down with this. So he said, well, you can put my name down. If they're all down with this, okay, you put my name. So bottom line is, I did a press release, we put it together, and the press release basically said exactly that. And the National Puerto Rican Business Council and Congressman Jose Serrano criticized Mayor Giuliani for disinviting a world leader, President Fidel Castro, from coming to events in the New York City that New York City had organized. We feel that's discriminatory because how come these other leaders who committed these other atrocious crimes were not disinvited? Therefore, we think blah, blah, blah. And then I added another paragraph or 2 sentences to that, which was like my tongue-in-cheek shit, was, President Castro, you don't have to eat with the mayor of the city of New York. If you want, why don't you come to the Bronx? The majority of Puerto Ricans will welcome you. That was it. We sent it out. That wasn't going to Fidel Castro. That wasn't going to the Cuban government. That wasn't going to the Cuban mission. That was going to the press. That's what I did. I put it in the fax machine. I put it in Diario. I put Noticias del Mundo. And that shit went out. That's it. I'm going back to my business. Within 24 hours, I get a call from Serrano. He said, what the fuck did you get me into, bro? Are you crazy? We're going to have demonstrations all over the fucking place, blah, blah, blah. I said, whoa, what are you talking about? And he gives me the story, which is in the book. So I won't give you the details of that, but you can get the book and find out the details. But he gives me the story about this prostitute that he remembered was a kid, blah, blah, blah. And somehow, that's how he wound up telling me about Fidel coming to saying yes. So when he gets to the ending of that story about him being a child and this prostitute that finally blah, 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 I connected and I said, bro, what does that have to do with, he said, Fidel said yes. I said, yes to what? He said, bro, to the press release you sent out. I said, but how did he get that press release? That press release went out to the press. He said, bro, I sent it to the Cuban mission in Washington, D.C., because he wanted to brag to the Cuban who was the highest Cuban here. There was no ambassador, but what would have been an ambassador working out of the Swedish embassy was the highest ranked Cuban in Washington, D.C., and him and Serrano had met several times or whatever. So Serrano, to brag, look what my district is doing for your president. And he sent them a fax. So he read it. When I'm doing the research for the book, I wanted to find out how the fuck did Fidel know about this? Because it wasn't, it wasn't to him. So 20 years later, I go to an event here at Ostos Community College. Nobody knew it was me. The rumors were that this was Jimmy's Bronx Café that organized this. The rumors were that this was Serrano who organized this. Nobody knew it was me. And I kept it that way. Until 20 years later, my brother from another mother, Hector Soto, who's been my homegrown attorney for the law, he tells me he's a professor at Ostos, and he says, yo, they're going to be doing something about Serrano. They wrote this book about him, and they're inviting people, who all participated. You work for Serrano. Did they invite you? I said, no. He said, why don't you come anyway, man? We're here. So I went to the event. I saw Serrano. We said hello to each other. I consider Serrano a friend, so not a problem. He asked me about my son. He asked me about whatever, boom, boom. And then he went up and they introduced him as, the congressman who had the courage to do some controversial things. And one of the things that he did, invite Fidel Castro to the Bronx. So Hector said, oh shit, look, he's going to mention it. So I said, all right. So I decided to stay. I'm in the back. Him and Hector and I are the only ones like standing up in the back because it was like standing room only. Of like all the chairs in the front were full. And he gets up and he says, yeah, sometimes as a congressman, you got to do controversial things. And that was one of the controversial things I had to do. And, I invited Fidel Castro to come to the Bronx. And bro, he never mentioned me. If he would have said, yo, Julio Pabón was back there and he helped me organize this, I would have never written this book. But he kept quiet. And that hurt. Because I was next to Hector. Hector just stabbed me in the wrist. He said, bro, if you don't fucking write that book, bro, nobody's ever going to know the truth. And that's thanks to Serrano that got me to be angry, to then spend 2 years doing the research to write this book. And since I had files on the stuff, every newspaper article, every clipping, but then I went to Cuba, thanks to another shit that happened because of my son who wanted to do something with Vice. And they hired me as a consultant. I went to Cuba and I was able to track down the guy who would have been the ambassador, the one that Serrano sent the fax to. He was the one that gave Fidel the what I call the briefing. He was the highest ranking Cuban. So Fidel's coming from all over Latin America, comes to New York, the highest ranking Cuban, meets him in New York, here on 34th Street or 31st Street, where they have the Cuban mission. We take him to dinner, and we asked them straight out. I said, mira, my son and I, we're there, and I said, listen, I plan to write a book about Fidel's visit. Oh, que chévere. See, I said, but how did this happen? Because we never sent an invitation to Fidel. So how does he know about this? And he started to laugh. He said, I get a fax from Serrano telling me about, look what his district is doing for Fidel. So I put it away. I'm the one responsible to go talk to Fidel and brief him. Fidel got over 200 and something invitations to do things in 7 days or 5 days in New York City. It was impossible. So we had to pick what are the things he's going to go to. New York Times, Univision, meeting in Wall Street, blah, 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 blah. And so I'm giving Fidel a briefing because Fidel is one of what they call tier 1 security. That means that's the highest level of security in the United States. That's for president in the United States. Nothing can happen to Fidel Castro here, which is ironic because the CIA had tried to kill him over 300 times. But yeah, he comes to New York and you can't get a fucking cold, So they're protecting the shit out of this guy. So they knew every single place that he had to go to months ahead of time. He's going to the New York Times. In case you don't know, tier 1 security, they already know it's going to go to the New York Times. They go out there, they look at all the blueprints. The president, when he goes somewhere, before he goes there, they have the blueprints of everything, where every sniper can possibly be to be able to get a clear shot at the president of the United States. All those areas are locked off. All those areas are, being perceived by other security personnel, so nobody has access to him. Everything. That happened with Fidel. So when he's giving Fidel a briefing, these are the ones that have been that we want you to go to. And he says, when I finished with all of that, I said, oh, by the way, this has been circulating. Because he says that when he got to New York, the mission to the United Nations, the Cuban mission, which is separate from the mission in Washington. The mission in Washington has to deal with what would be an embassy at that level. The mission to Cuba to the United Nations is separate. That's the Cuban mission to the United Nations. they got a copy of the press release because Franklin Flores, who was one of the guys that was with me at the time, which I helped put in through RTP to become a carpenter, right? A super friend. His wife is the president of the, not-for-profit Friends of Cuba, Casa de las Americas. So she then sends that to the Cuban mission. So he says, I go to New York, I have something from Serrano in Washington. I come to New York, I get the same thing from the Cuban mission, and they give me clippings of a newspaper article. Because the diario published something about, the National Puerto Rican Business Council criticizes Giuliani for this and this. So I have to tell Fidel. So after the event, after I gave him all the official brief, I said, Comandante, this is also circulating. And Fidel read my press release. And he put it down. He said, dile a mi amigo puertorriqueño que para mí esto es como ganarme un premio Nobel. It's like winning a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm going to go. He said, hell no. He said he kept quiet, but his security, the Cuban security that was with him in the room for the briefing, because they need to know everything that's going on, they said, Comandante, eso no se puede hacer. Imposible. And Fidel said, ¿por qué? Dice, porque no tenemos, eso no está en la lista. Y todo lo que está en la lista tuvo que ser aprobado por los Estados Unidos y el Departamento de Seguridad de los Estados Unidos. Todas sus reuniones ya están planificadas. Pero Fidel's a smart man. He knows that the law does not allow him to travel more than 20 miles from the United Nations. The South Bronx is only, like 6 miles? So Fidel said, no, vamos para el sur del Bronx. And the security was like livid, Comandante, because they knew the fucking South Bronx. This is like, you want to go where? This ain't going to Wall Street, Baba. This ain't going, if they want to off you, that's one place they can possibly do it because it's not on a fucking radar, man. And Fidel insisted. And then the U.S. Secret Service was told, Fidel wants to go to this. And they said, no, impossible. We cannot. We cannot guarantee his security. And Fidel wants to go. So the next thing, read my book, they went after me. They were trying to tell me, you shouldn't do this. We read your stuff. It's not really an invitation. It was just a press release. I think he misunderstood, thinking it was an invitation. Besides, you got children. They seem to be pretty good. They're eventually going to be going to a college. They might want to eventually run for office. You might want to run for office one day. This can really hurt you. Blah blah. So they try to give me that approach, and I said no. If Fidel wants to come, who am I to say no? And they basically told me the truth. They said every place that we have that he's going to has been secured. We can't secure the South Bronx. So I told the guy, I wrote it in my book, I said, wait a minute, the Secret Service that can't secure him in the South Bronx? You guys are afraid to go to the South Bronx? And the rest is history, bro. The way that they secured the South Bronx was they went through fucking Knipschitz. They closed everything in the Fordham Road. It was ridiculous. It was after they went through the whole shit with me, they tried the nice way. Then the second time they met with me, they tried to tell me that I had to change it. Okay, but it has to be in Manhattan. And I said, no, it has to be the Bronx. That's where we're at. We can control the Bronx. And they was like, again, they went through Knipschitz with me. And then I had to go through the Knipschitz with Jimmy and everybody because I had to tell them, listen, man, this is going to happen. And Jimmy told me, but you told me that this was just to put a press release, bro. You didn't tell me this was going to happen. I said, Jimmy, what can I tell you, man? I didn't expect this either, So the whole thing was that they then came the day before the event. We had already organized it. I was thinking, when Serrano called me, criticizing me and jumping on me about how many people were going to be protesting in front of his office, and I had to cool him down. I said, bro, trust me, ain't no Cubans going to come to the South Bronx. Especially back then. Bro, I grew up here. And in 1995, I still had my foot in the deepest parts of the South Bronx. From the guys who were dealing to the guys who are stealing to the guys who are, dealing in government. I knew the whole rank because I never discriminate against anybody. I treat them all so fair and share. So if you're gonna come here and fuck around, bro, you gotta be knowing you're not gonna leave here. here safely if you're gonna come here. So I told Serrano, trust me, no Cuban's gonna come to 149th Street and 3rd Avenue to protest in your office. Because I would definitely surround them, bro, with guys, man, that they ain't never gonna want to come back here. So he calmed down, and I said, we didn't say how many people. So if we get the National Puerto Rican Business Council, which is the group that sponsored this whole thing, Carlos and them were happy with it. So I said, we get Carlos, his wife, the members of the board, their girlfriends or their wives. That's maybe, 20 people? Myself, my family, Serrano, his staff, maybe 25 people. It's a dinner at Fidel. But freaking Serrano now seeing that, hey, this is a major shit, because everybody wanted to come. Every single body wanted to come to meet Fidel, bro. I'm talking about, bro, I had calls from Puerto Rico, friends of mine who were calling me, coño, Julio, dame dos boletos, you couldn't tell eso. So it went from 25 people to 35 people to 45 people, 50 people, 100 people, 125 people, 200 people, bro. My daughter, Kimberly, who's in the book, who I was with yesterday, bro, she told me, because she was working with me for Morivivi, my interpreting business in Latino sports. And she told me, Pa, you gotta talk to Serrano, man. This has to stop, because the deal we have with the Secret Service was every person that's going to this event, they needed to have date of birth, social security number, employment, address, all the contact information had to be sent to them. Those days, we didn't have internet, all that shit. It had to be faxed. So my daughter had to type all that shit up, send it to them by fax. And then like 2 or 3 hours later, send another list. Then another 2 hours later, send another list. So I had to tell someone, bro, you gotta stop. You gotta stop. This shit is like, first of all, we told Jimmy 25, 30 people. Now you're talking about close to 300 people. So it was fucking crazy. But then the second thing was that fucking Jimmy calls me up the day before the event, cursing me out again. This time he's cursing me out because the Secret Service, I didn't know this shit. I don't know how they operate. They went to the restaurant and they swept it. And when they sweep it, that's it. It's closed. Nobody else can come in. They come in there with dogs. They come in to check every single nook and cranny of this place. They went outside to check out all the points where he can be off from the very high-falutin, middle-class buildings to the north, Fordham Hills, to the hood on the 100 on Fordham Road. Everything has to be checked out. And bro, they put flyers everywhere. Nobody can be on the roofs here past this time. Nobody can be on the fire escapes at this time. Nobody can be in the balconies at the Fordham Hills at this time. They were scoping on all that shit, bro. The river was closed. No ships, no boats, no yachts, no nothing, no ski. Nothing could be going through the Harlem River, bro. That shit was stopped. There was a gunboat there. Fordham Road was closed. Traffic on Fordham Road was closed. No traffic can go through there. Bro, that shit was like, wow. And we go and we have the event that day. It was an incredible evening because my mind is just racing on getting this shit done. I want this shit to be over. But then I realized, shit, this could be the place that they could offer him. Because they can say, hey, we warned him. We told him that we're not prepared to protect him in the South Bronx. We could protect him in the areas we chose. But this was a last minute thing. So therefore, we're not responsible for this. So I said, shit, I can't trust the U.S. Secret Service. The Cuban Secret Service wanted me to give them copies of everything I gave to the U.S. Secret Service. But I don't know what contacts they had here other than protecting him when they're with him. So I decided to say, shit, I got to have my own security. So I don't know if you know Fast Feet Fontanez. Fast Feet Fontanez is